The sky above Hollow Creek was the color of cooled ashes, and the wind moved like a sigh through the tall pines. Morning had not yet found its courage to bloom, and in that half-light, Clara May Hollister knelt in her garden, turning the soil with quiet hands. Her cabin sat at the far edge of town, where no one came unless they had to, and that was just how she preferred it. Her fingers were chapped from the cold, her apron smudged with earth. She didn't speak much anymore, hadn't since Thomas, her husband, rode into the storm 2 winters ago and never came back. The town had decided its own version of what happened. They always did. Some said he ran away with another woman. Others whispered darker things, their voices carrying through the mercantile and church porch like burrs on the wind. That's the widow who lost her man to the woods, they said, and maybe she knows more than she lets on. Clara had grown used to the sound of her own silence. It was steadier than people's words. This morning, the woods felt different. The kind of different that made the air press heavy against the lungs. Somewhere a hawk cried, and the echo carried far too long. As Clara stooped to gather the last of her herbs, the quiet broke apart. From the fog, a shape stumbled forward, a black horse, wild-eyed, sides streaked with mud, breath coming ragged. He moved as if chased by the ghosts that still haunted the land. Clara froze. The animal swayed once, twice, then crumpled near her fence. Her body moved before her mind did. "Easy there," she whispered, voice trembling. The horse's eyes flicked toward her, glassy with fear and pain. She came closer, step by careful step, until her hand brushed his neck. His skin quivered under her touch, then stilled. There was a small gash along his flank, nothing fatal, but deep enough to speak of cruelty. Clara fetched warm water and a rag. She cleaned the wound, humming a tune she hadn't sung since Thomas left. It filled the silence in a way that startled her. When the horse finally slept, she stayed beside him, sitting in the straw, her hand resting on his shoulder as if to anchor them both. "You came from somewhere," she murmured. "Or someone sent you." By evening, she'd dragged a blanket from the cabin and covered him. She decided to call him Midnight. It fit. Something about the way his coat caught the faintest glint of silver reminded her of the hours she spent staring at the sky, waiting for answers that never came. The next few days blurred quietly. Midnight regained his strength, and Clara began speaking again, mostly to him. She told him about her garden, about the river behind the ridge, about how the stars looked different since Thomas vanished. The horse listened with that slow, knowing patience animals carry when they've seen too much. But peace in Hollow Creek never lasted long. One afternoon, when she rode into town for supplies, the whispers started again. Martha Greeley, the woman whose words built and broke reputations, sidled up beside her near the store counter. "Still living all alone by those woods, are you?" she asked sweetly. "You be careful, Clara May. Folks see things out there, hear things too." "Wouldn't want another tragedy." Clara said nothing. She turned away, clutching her oats and salt, but not before catching sight of Elias Boone across the street. Quiet man, unshaven, loading crates onto a wagon. He looked up and met her eyes. No pity, no judgment. Just a nod that said he understood the weight of being misunderstood. That night, thunder prowled the edges of the valley. The sky flickered pale blue through the cracks in the barn wall. Clara checked on Midnight before bed, running her hand along his neck. That's when she saw it, a torn saddlebag half buried in the hay, something he must have carried with him from wherever he came. Inside lay a weathered pocket knife, the initials carved faint and crooked. T.H., her knees nearly gave. Thomas Hollister, her husband's knife, the one he always carried when he rode into those woods. She sank onto the floorboards, the wind howling through the gaps, and turned the knife over in her shaking hands. The blade caught a shard of lightning. How? The world she'd built from silence began to tilt. Midnight pawed the ground restlessly, head tossing toward the trees beyond the fence. His ears pricked, muscles tense. She followed his gaze into the black mouth of the forest. All night she lay awake, hearing things that might have been the storm or the past returning. When sleep finally came, it brought dreams. Thomas riding into the woods, turning once in the rain to look back at her, eyes full of warning she never understood. She woke before dawn to the sound of hoofbeats and a low, throaty whinny. Midnight again, staring into the mist, his breath visible in the cold air. Something in his stance told her he wanted her to follow. Her heart pounded. She hadn't set foot in those woods since the search party found nothing but broken branches and mud. But she couldn't ignore it now. The horse's urgency. The knife with her husband's name. The ache that had never healed. Clara threw on her coat, fastened the saddle she hadn't used in years, and stepped into the gray morning. The forest loomed like an old memory she was finally ready to face. "All right, boy," she whispered, climbing onto Midnight's back. "Show me." The wind gathered behind them as they moved toward the tree line, the cabin shrinking in the distance, the first light of day trembling over the valley. The path narrowed, twisted. Every hoofbeat echoed like a heartbeat beneath her ribs. Somewhere deep inside, fear began to loosen its grip. The woods weren't calling her to get lost. They were calling her home. And as the mist swallowed them both, the sun rose behind the ridge, painting the sky in soft gold, the first true dawn Clara May Hollister had seen in years. The forest swallowed the sound of hooves like a secret being kept. Mist coiled between the trunks, soft as smoke, and every breath Clara took came out like a prayer she didn't remember learning. Midnight walked slow but sure, his ears twitching, his stride steady as if he already knew the way. Clara let him lead. She didn't speak, only listened. To the rustle of the trees, to the soft drip of dew from the pine needles, to her own heartbeat echoing inside her ribs. The woods had changed since that night her husband vanished, but maybe she had too. The deeper they went, the more the air thickened. The path bent around a fallen cedar, and through the break in the trees she saw it, a clearing lit by the bruised light of dawn, and in its center a fallen oak half covered in moss. Something about it pulled at her. Midnight stopped. He pawed the earth, snorted once, and looked back at her. Clara slid off the saddle and crouched near the trunk. Her fingers brushed against something cold beneath the leaves. A rusted tin box, corners dented, edges lined with dirt. She hesitated, then pried it open. Inside lay a bundle of folded letters bound with a strip of leather. Her breath caught when she saw her own name scrawled across the top one. Clara May Hollister. Her hands shook as she untied the string. The first letter smelled faintly of pine and smoke. The ink had bled from rain, but the words still spoke clear as a voice she'd never forgotten. "Clara, if you're reading this, then the truth found its way home. The men you've seen near town, Boone, Dyer, all of them, ain't what they seem. Some run horses off government land and break them for profit. I tried to stop them. Thought I could scare them quiet. I was wrong. If I don't make it back, promise me you'll keep to the cabin. Elias Boone knows the truth. He'll protect you if he can. Trust him." Her fingers froze. Elias Boone. The quiet ranch hand who'd nodded to her across the street, the man who'd watched her from the edges of her loneliness, was not part of the lie. He'd been part of the truth. She unfolded another letter, then another. Each one told more of the same. A fight in the woods, a betrayal, the sound of shots, a man riding into fog with the evidence he'd die to protect. Tears slipped down her face. She pressed the papers to her chest, the weight of years finally cracking open inside her. "You were trying to save them," she whispered. "And they buried you with their silence." A twig snapped behind her. She turned. Two men stepped from the fog, faces half-shadowed, boots slick with mud. Their voices were rough, the kind that learned cruelty young and never forgot it. "We've been waiting for someone to dig that up," one of them drawled. "Didn't think it'd be you." Clara backed toward Midnight, clutching the letters. "You don't belong here," she said, though her voice trembled. "Neither did your husband," the man sneered. He should have left well enough alone. A flash of silver, the glint of a pistol. Midnight reared, neighing so loud it shattered the fog. Clara stumbled, her boot sinking into the mud. The first man stepped closer, gun raised. Then a voice broke through the trees, calm and cold as winter steel. "Put it down!" Elias Boone stepped into view, shotgun leveled, his face drawn hard. The mist curled around him like smoke from a dying fire. "I told you boys years ago to leave her be," he said. "You didn't listen then. You'll listen now." The standoff stretched thin. A raindrop fell, then another. The forest held its breath. Finally, the older man spat into the dirt and lowered his gun. "You don't want to start this again, Boone?" "You're right," Elias said softly. "I want to end it." His voice carried such quiet certainty that the men stepped back. They muttered curses, then vanished into the fog, their threats fading with their footsteps. When the silence returned, Clara stood frozen, letters clutched to her chest. Elias lowered the shotgun, his hands trembling once before he steadied them. "You knew," she said. Her voice cracked. "You knew what happened," he nodded. "Your husband and I, Thomas, we were working together. We found proof of the stolen horses. When they came after him, he sent word for me to hide the rest. I did, but I couldn't stop what followed." Her throat tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because the truth would have just painted a new target on you, and I couldn't let that happen. For a long time, the only sound was the rain, soft, steady, like the land itself was weeping." Midnight lowered his head and brushed against Clara's shoulder, grounding her back to earth. She looked up at Elias, eyes red, heart raw. "He trusted you, and I failed him." Clara shook her head. "You kept me alive." "That's more than most men would have done." The words lingered between them, heavy and tender. No declarations followed, just a silence that understood too much to need filling. By morning, the rain had washed the mud clean. Together they rode out of the forest, the sun finally breaking through the clouds. The letters lay tucked safe in Clara's satchel, their truth no longer buried. When they reached town, Sheriff Dyer read the words Thomas had written. His jaw set hard, and though no one spoke it aloud, everyone knew what the letters meant. Justice might come late, but it would come all the same. And for the first time in years, the townsfolk of Hollow Creek looked at Clara May Hollister with something other than suspicion. Days passed into weeks. The garden behind her cabin bloomed again, the soil rich from rain. Midnight grazed freely, no longer a stranger but a companion. Sometimes Clara would see Elias riding the ridge at dusk, keeping a quiet distance like he always had. But when their paths crossed, he'd tip his hat and she'd smile, a real smile, soft and unhurried. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the horizon burned gold, Elias stopped by her fence. "Heard the sheriff's taking the case to trial," he said. "Reckon you'll be free of their talk soon?" Clara looked toward the woods, her voice calm. "Their talk don't matter much anymore. I know what's true now." He nodded, eyes thoughtful. "You gonna keep that wild one?" She glanced at Midnight, who lifted his head as if to answer for her. "He found me," she said quietly. "Guess that means I was the one lost." Elias smiled, not wide, but enough to reach his eyes. "World's got a way of sending back what we think we've lost." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and sage across the valley. The two stood there in the soft orange light, saying nothing more. There was no need. As Elias rode off, the camera would linger. Clara standing by the fence, one hand resting on the black horse's neck, her face lifted toward the fading sun. The woods behind her were quiet now. No secrets, no ghosts. Only truth and peace and the soft sound of hooves in the grass. And in that stillness, a voice rose, like an old soul remembering something worth keeping. Some truths don't come crashing through doors. They stumble in, tired, bruised, half-starved, and ask only to be seen. That's how grace finds us. Not in thunder or fire, but in the quiet, when we're finally ready to listen. The screen fades to amber light. The story ends where healing begins,